Hello, future faculty and students. I'm Justin Samuels.
I'm Olivia Anthony.
I'm Elijah Floyd.
And I'm Doug Corey.
And let's have a slice of the stress pie at Grand Valley State. So, this podcast is for our capstone class for anthropology. Basically, what we're doing is we're hope to get a thorough yet condensed understanding of how the topic of stress is discussed and studied in the various subfields of anthropology. Our subfield specifically that we are focusing on is culture anthropology, where we hope to give you, our audience, the insider view of the topic of stress for students. We decided to investigate this issue through certain different types of methods and strategies. Our first one was we did these intercept interviews, our street intercept interviews, where we interviewed like 2 to 3 students for a brief 5 to 10 minutes with a few questions. And then on another day, we had a table set up on the building of Kirchhoff at Grand Valley, which is like one of the main buildings here, where we set up a poster that gave the students the option to write down their main stressors in like 1 to 2 words, a very simple way to get the word out for themselves. And then we gave them the option of going more in depth through other interviews where we recorded them and gave them more questions to answer.
Yeah, so everything is connected, right? Whether your stress is mainly from school or your job or having roommates or any of the other relationships that you have in life, students have a lot on their plate. So I think it's important to remember that oftentimes we're dealing with all of these different stressors at once, and that can really give us a lot of anxiety, and that's completely normal. But it can be hard to deal with, especially during a time as turbulent as college.
Yeah, and this is kind of a period of your life where you're in a state of constant change. Your beliefs and pretty much everything about your life is going to be changing year by year, and so it's important to remember how these things happen and to reprocess and recast your life events in order to sort of grow with it. Your relationships are going to reflect that constant change as well, which can lead to instability and, therefore lead to stress. We chose to use a podcast in this situation to approach resolving people's anxiety about future suffering by examining the experiences and narratives that already exist within the culture, the ways that people have already suffered. And, these memories, the things that are sticking out in your brain as important, are things that have already challenged your expectations, and those are the things that lead to greater life insights.
Hey, Justin, what is anthropology anyway?
I'm glad you asked. Basically, what anthropology is in a very broad sense is the study of humans and their development throughout times between human societies and different cultures, and kind of their cause and effect. Alright, so based off of our methods and interviews that we conducted in our time at Kirchhoff, based off what the student says, we kind of found 3 main themes. One of them being imposter syndrome, and if Doug, would you like to kind of elaborate more on that theme?
Yeah, so the imposter syndrome that students feel is usually associated with the idea that when you're meeting a new person, you don't necessarily know what their life experience is. So bringing your own life experience to that context is a little bit scary, and you don't really know how to form your identity in relation to that person. So just knowing who you are is kind of the way to sort of circumvent that. But a lot of people come into college not necessarily knowing that. You've just come from the context that you lived with your family, your identity was so strongly associated with your family and your community, and the act of trying to be your own person in a new context where everybody comes from a different background is kind of daunting.
And this is why first impressions are so important, because they determine the quality of relationships, power dynamics, and the extent of the relationship. This can cause some people feel overwhelmed with first impressions because of how important they are, but having a good understanding of yourself and others will allow you to better present yourself in a college, when you first get there as a freshman, so that you don't feel like you have to be somebody else or change your beliefs or your actions based on how others feel.
Yeah, for me, I would say the biggest thing is when I came to college, I really didn't know who I was or who I wanted to be, which is kind of scary. And I ended up changing my major, and I feel like a lot of people do that. I also think that people take the entire 4 years to figure out who they want to be too, which is scary. But, you know, it happens. And even now, like getting ready to graduate, it's still happening, and it is what it is.
Yeah, I feel like I've always like known what kind of route I wanted to do and like what my beliefs were when I came, but like also like presenting those to people like on campus or trying to find like when you're a freshman, other like anthropologists, like now like when you're a junior or senior, you can kind of like find like-minded people, but first you're in those like gen eds and you're kind of still like trying to figure out what you want to do, and then how people view you when you say, oh, I want to be an anthropologist, and you're like, oh really, like I want to be an engineer, or like I want to make a lot of money like in business or whatnot. But yeah, definitely I definitely had those beliefs there, and like I've always wanted to be something related to anthropology, but then kind of portray those to other people.
And I also feel like, especially with that like transition in between high school and college, and even college to like at post graduation, there's just, you are set in this setting where you are with the same people, like especially in high school, you've been with the same people for so long, you guys practically merge into like not like the same person, but like you practically are become like the same person, do a lot of the same things. But then once you go to college, there's just a wide variety of different people you have to meet, and then that's kind of what causes that anxiety between that transition and that first year of college, or even other years of college, is basically just trying to fit in into the context of all these other people who you possibly aren't used to, because like we talked about those different backgrounds and like different ways you can meet people and how you view people. It just kind of brings that stress to yourself because you want to fit into the context of how they feel, and there's that like stigma of always feeling like you have to make new friends, and the friends that you make are the ones that you are friends with for the rest of your life, and that makes it stressful when meeting new people. And that's where that imposter syndrome thing kind of comes in. You like kind of rethink yourself and how you view yourself.
Yeah, because I mean, you don't want to form a relationship and then realize later on that it's something that you didn't really want to begin with. I think it's kind of interesting the way that we kind of do that, like especially coming in as freshmen, everybody kind of is friends with the first people they lay eyes on. So I don't know if you guys shared that experience, but like a lot of times that ends up with you not necessarily liking the relationships that you've created, and like those relationships are the only ones that you feel like you're allowed to have. I mean, like when you were at home, when you were in like your like own individual context, like there was like more definitely a more limited scope of like the amount of like backgrounds that people had that you can access, like the relationships that you can form, and like because you're developing in that context, like that becomes who you are, you know. Like my girlfriend and I talk about this all the time when we were looking at like old like pictures of us as like babies and stuff like that. Like this is more of a comparison, but like looking at yourself as a baby, you kind of realize that at that point in your life, you didn't realize that you were a separate person from your mom. Like I think that's kind of like how it sort of becomes as you go into high school and stuff like that. Like you make your friends and like you realize, like you figure out who they are, and like you kind of like take things from that. You take things from like your own life and like your family and stuff like that, and like you're not necessarily your own person because your own person is so strongly tied to the people around you. So I feel like a lot of people end up like looking for that when they get to college and stuff like that, but like that's not what it's gonna be. Like people need boundaries in college. Like we all come from different backgrounds and we all have different expectations and stuff like that, which we'll talk about next. But I think that like that is probably one of the biggest issues, like the fact that like not only do you not know who you are when you come to college, you don't realize that you need to start figuring out who you are, and like you don't know how to like do that independently of the relationships that you've been growing up alongside of like your entire life.
And then kind of going off of that, like part of me thought I knew who I was in high school, and I was like, oh, you know, for example, I love history, and I thought I knew tons about history, and then I came to college, and then you're in a room with a bunch of other people who know more about history than you do, and you thought that it was unique to you for a little while, you know what I mean? And so I think for me, college was also, you come to a place expecting everything to be like high school in a way, and it's not, and it's big, you know?
Yeah, no, you're right. It is, and it's bigger than any other context. Like, it not only does it feel bigger, like it literally is bigger than any other context you've ever been a part of. And that's because like it's packed with like the symbolic meaning that like you're supposed to be turning into somebody while you're here. But that's not always an easy thing to conceptualize. Like, I think that I thought that I was a person when I first came here, and at every step of the way, my expectations were confounded. Like, I didn't feel like I knew what was going on when like my relationships were failing. I didn't feel like I knew what was going on when my relationships were good. Like, I didn't know what I was doing right and what I was doing wrong. And like, I feel like a big part of like resolving that imposter syndrome and starting to figure out who you are in college is like navigating your relationships, like starting to figure out like determining cause effect in that way, and like seeing the way that your actions kind of like reverberate in like the larger world and like on campus and stuff like that. Because like it is kind of, campus is essentially like a microcosmic expression of the larger world because of all the context that we draw from. I know that we're not the most diverse campus in the entire world, obviously, but like it does like show you what like your future life might look like, in the sense that you're exposed to all those different life experiences.
And also that definitely is what causes like the main stress and like to overthink, is because like kind of what they were both just saying, how you come into college and it just really hits you in the face, and it's something that you don't expect because you think you're one person, and then once you get to college in that freshman year, you become a completely different person, and that kind of shocks you, and it causes you to overthink of like who you are and what you want to be after college or like during college, and even like the transition, or not the transition, but like the time period between your freshman and your senior year, you change a great amount in between that time also. So it's constant like overthinking of who you want to become and like who you are now and what you will become after college, and that causes myself, and I'm sure all the other students, to just stress out about their life now and their future life.
Okay, so the next big theme that we noticed a lot of students kept on bringing up was the expectations that they had for themselves, and also the expectations that were put on them by other people. And this is a super big thing in college, because I know everybody goes home, and on family gatherings, people come up and they're like, hey, what are you majoring in? What are you doing? And everybody has their own opinions about everything in your life. So I know for myself, and probably for a lot of people, I put these expectations on myself, like, oh, you should be healthy, you should eat healthy, you should go work out, you should get all your homework done, you should invest time in these relationships. And it's a lot of goals at once, and it's definitely doable, but to be in college and also set really high expectations for yourself can be personally really draining.
Just like talking about that a little bit more, like the like being able to balance all the things in your life, and like having like goals that are associated with different parts of your life, expecting that of yourself is very difficult, because like I know, at least for me, like I will, like, because I feel like I have so much to remember, and like I also feel like it's reasonable for me to be expected to remember that. Like, I expect that of myself. Like, I notice in other parts of my life, I forget about the most ridiculous thing. I forget about, like, I'll forget to turn any light off when I leave my apartment for 3 days. Or I'll forget that I have work at 4 instead of 5, you know? Some stuff like that like, it previously in my life, I never would have had an issue with. It just feels like there's so much to constantly be at the center of your focus that, like, you can't really manage it all. And I feel like that kind of connects with others' expectations for you, because, like, to an extent, you're expecting other people to engage with you at the same level, and like you know, there's people that you like and people that you don't like, and you want the people that you like to, like, show them how much they like you. Like, that's your expectation for them, and when they don't do that, it feels like something personal. But like, it's never that way. Like, I never feel that way when I'm not showing somebody equal interest. Like, it's mostly just about me and like what I'm dealing with in the moment. And so, like, just kind of like reprocessing that expectation in yourself is a big part of like developing, I feel like, or it was a big part of my own development in college.
Yeah, for me, I felt when I moved it to Grand Valley, I moved into an apartment off campus, and just like the connection and like expectations I met from my roommates, like just at daily life, because I spent most of my time with them. So expectations from other people that I would see like an hour a day wouldn't exactly like stick with me for that long. But for some reason, like for my 3 roommates and like their expectations about the house or like what they do it on the weekends or like kind of what I should be doing with my time, like those expectations somehow stuck with me longer, even though I kind of didn't know them at first. Like walking into a new classroom, I didn't really know them. They're just random people. But by like being around them all the time, my expectations for myself seemed to change, and theirs started to seem a little bit more important to me.
No matter like what context you're in, whether you like it or not, there's always going to be some sort of expectation put on you. Like in class, for example, your teachers have expectations about you. Even if you're someone who thinks only my expectations matter, there's always going to be that stigma put on yourself and stigma that's put on from others of, well, you should be. And there's like this society is kind of like constructed this way of how we have to live our life, which is like go to school, get a job, make a certain amount of money, and like that's how you'll be happy. So that, me personally, causes me a lot of stress because I feel like I have to live up to those expectations that society puts on us. And other expectations like from like family or like friends. Like you could have like friends, for me example, I have a lot of friends who are in like the business area of like majoring and that sort of thing, and I don't want to say have their life figured out, but kind of it seems like they do more than I do in a sense, and that causes me to overthink and feel like I have to live up to their expectations as well, because they have high expectations for themselves, and that makes me feel like their expectations for me are also high. And there's just that social stigma of feeling like I have to always live up to these expectations, and that causes me to overthink and just stress about that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I feel like that kind of speaks to like losing your. I think that what I expected going into college was that I was going to have boundless control over what I was doing, over my life, over like literally everything. However, like you start to realize the way that like as you keep going through the years, like you realize the way that it is cut out for you in a way, and like that is like you kind of I personally despaired at that realization. Like that was like really hard for me to accept because I had always been so obsessed with the idea of confounding people's expectations and like being something like that I felt was personally meaningful, that I controlled, and that I don't know, that I would like I just wanted to be something that like was not expected, you know? And I felt like people's expectations for me were essentially like attempt at coercion and stuff like that. But like the reality is that like you don't control other people's expectations for you, but they are allowed to have them, you know? Like you form expectations for literally everybody. Like that's how you interact. That's how you like walk up to somebody and say something because you're expecting them to react a certain way. And if they don't react that way, you just kind of have to adjust. But besides that, like the sense of control is kind of connected with the way that like, you know, you have all this freedom. However, there are like you have to work, you have to do your schoolwork, and you have to take care of your health, like Olivia said. But like that takes up almost 100% of your time, and like it doesn't necessarily feel like that's fair all the time. That 100% of your time should be used up by the time that like you've accomplished everything that you're expected to accomplish.
And also I feel like that's back to like the standard that like American society puts on ourselves is like we feel like we have to live up to these expectations. So when we have like days that we want to do nothing or just relax and have our own day for like our own mental health or our physical health or whatever it may be, just sitting there and doing nothing causes you to stress about not doing anything because you feel like you have to be doing something. And that's kind of what like society is put on ourselves, and that's like where the expectations come in hand, because you feel bad about doing nothing, but when you're doing something you want to be doing nothing. But when you're actually doing nothing, you're like, I just feel lazy and I don't feel right about doing this. I wish I could be doing something more productive or whatnot. But then it's just like a constant cycle of like stressing yourself out in that sort of sense.
Yeah, and going off that, if you're able to, like, I know I personally like make a list of like things I need to get done. Like, I don't keep like a standard schedule, but when things are like get to be a lot, I make a list, and then some of them can include like going disc golfing or going for a walk. That way I can, like Olivia said earlier, I can cross something out, and then that way I just like, yep, I did something. Like, I was supposed to do that. It's good for me. I did it, and moving forward. Like, that way I don't like sit at home and thinking, oh, I need to be doing this, I need to be doing that, and like letting my mental health just worsen by not doing anything other than just scrolling around my phone or something.
So going back to what we were talking about earlier, I don't remember if we were recording at that time, but we were talking about like Justin mentioned that like on a day that like you can literally like shell out an entire day that you want to be for rest and you want to be for recharge, but like you can also have that day and not feel good the entire time because of the amount of shame that comes with the fact that you've regained that sense of control, that like your 100% of your time isn't being dominated by your obligations and stuff. And like if even despite the fact that like I personally have experienced like a lot of discomfort with my lack of control, like I feel like there's still this sense of shame when I even get some of that back. Like, I feel like I don't necessarily deserve it because I haven't accomplished everything that there is to. And it's like the idea that like if I have this once, I'm gonna want it all the time. Like once your rest day ends, then it's just over, and like then you have to pick it up again. And like sometimes I feel like I haven't even like done the requisite labor to like fully bring my brain and my emotions back up to the point where I'm able to do that. So like just like the idea that like it is impermanent, and like everything's impermanent. Like the one thing that you can always expect is that like when you're stressed out, you can expect that there are gonna be times when you're less stressed out. But when you're less stressed out, you can expect there's gonna be times that suck. Like they're gonna be really stressful. And so like just like knowing that, like that's just gonna be your response to life. Like I feel like that is kind of helpful in the way I process like letting myself have things and stuff like that, and letting myself live outside my obligations.
Yeah, like you can't have happiness without sadness.
Yeah, you can't. It's true. Like the idea is like the whole idea that like you're free in your mind is kind of dependent on the notion that like you can't control anything else. Like you can't control anything except for the way that you feel about it. Not that you can always control that, but.
So for our final and third theme, which was life stages, we felt that a lot of students, based off our interviews, felt that college is like a transitional period that is marked by rapid change, where like habits that might have been unhealthy are considered like short-lived due to this rapid change. And this kind of goes back to like expectations of ourselves from others as well, because you aren't expecting to have to contend with questions of personal achievement, so you're already contending with them. And that's kind of like where anxiety comes from, like trying to remain as a student and a young adult privately, but then actively trying to cultivate an honest and accurate professional identity. And that's kind of where you feel like that professional identity is suddenly inseparable from your own identity in general.
Yeah, and I feel like a big part of it is just like trying to find value in like what you're doing in the here and now. And like how are you supposed to do that in a situation where like that like within a certain window it's going to be a very short amount of time before your life changes completely. Like you're not like nothing feels permanent. Like take like moving in and out, for instance. Like you can't love a space that you live in because you're not going to be in it for more than a year. And so like just like the impermanence and like the prolonged impermanence is I think what really is the issue here, because like I don't necessarily see meaning in the present moment all the time, because I know that the present moment is so short-lived, and I don't feel like it's going to matter like what I'm doing now. Like sure, like I'll like do substances and stuff like that because it doesn't matter right now, because I won't do that after I graduate. but like it is kind of like an interesting way that we view college, that like it is a discrete like stage in your life that like has a definitive start and end. I don't necessarily like we know that habits don't start and end. Habits are, created by us, but like it still feels that way. Like mentally, like I feel like I could probably stop using after college, because by that time I'm not going to be in college anymore. Like I'm just going to be completely different.
It's kind of like saying that you're not an alcoholic until you graduate, or like that you'll experiment in college or whatever, like you'll have a good time, or kind of that old school way thinking of like how college is. But then you also realize that you have to be like studious and professional, and you have like even in college separate life stages where you may have time to party or like figure out who you are, or like do different clubs, but then maybe you later get stressed and you realize that like, oh man, I have to figure out what I want to be, what I want to study. And like each of these just breaks into a whole new or big decisions that could cause a new stage. Yeah, in your freshman and sophomore year you can change your major, and that happens a lot, but once you like really lock it in junior year, then you've really solidified yourself into a certain life stage, and then you have to start to learn and act like everyone else, but understand concepts and such, so that you can be like, professional in the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, like, the truth is that, like, all your freedom is condensed into the present moment. However, like, it's impossible to see it that way when, like everything about your experience is forward-thinking. Like, you have to think, like, multiple years ahead constantly, because, like, that's just the way it is. Like, that's, like, what you've got to believe, because you've got to, like, end up as an individual that can participate in the society that has been constructed for us. However, like, that society is dependent on such archaic notions like the nuclear family and stuff like that. So stuff that's dependent on patriarchy and hegemony and coercion and stuff like, because like in past context it was appropriate under like the capitalistic conditions of 1950s America, that like if a family is a family, that's a discrete unit, and there's the mother who's loyal to the domestic, like to the household, and then there's the father who's loyal to his organization, to like his interests are the organization's interests, like his job, the business, and like that's like the definitive separation. And now we're like trying to readjust and like with our modern understandings of things, and like sort of like shake that up a little bit, because the idea in college is that everybody should have an equal chance to succeed and stuff like that. But like we still have this foundational understanding that like your entire self is contained within the nuclear family, and that's a value isolated space. Like you can't necessarily, like it's hard to move past that, because of the way that it is seen as your central node of support. Like you can't move beyond it.
And I feel like that's where the stress from that transition between like high school and college comes from, because you are constructed into this like mindset that you have within your family, because obviously as a kid you're gonna have the same like beliefs and like kind of sort of thought system that your parents do, because you really don't know any better, or you don't really have any other option to think otherwise. So once you get to that next life stage, which is like college, you are able to have that freedom of, I guess, free thinking in a sense, and that's where like your own personal identity kind of gets questioned, like we talked about earlier, because you are forced to think differently of how you did previously in your nuclear family, and that's a crazy change to go through when you're transitioning to college. And
I also think it's important to remember too that your values can and probably will change over time. Like you don't need to be the person right now that you want to be for the rest of your life. If you decide to change it up when you're 25, 30, 80 years old, like it doesn't really matter. You can still change things, and your values are going to change with you.
And when values change, when you go off to college, and then like for a lot of students, when they had to return home, they had to like almost readapt to their parents' values and like what they believe is right.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what I was thinking is like the way that we like conceptualize life stages is kind of what is confounding in the situation, because you start out with like the you're in your nuclear family, and then you're told to go to a new context where you're supposed to be part of a community and like change your values and readapt and like become your own person. And then like what comes after that, like the end goal is essentially to go back and be part of a nuclear family again, which is a value isolated space, and like all you're really doing is replicating that discomfort in future generations. And so like that's something that you have to contend with at the same time. And you're also like the impermanence of the community that you formed over the 4 years. And it's like, what's the point of being part of a nuclear family for your entire life, and then, you know, break it up for 4 years, you're in a new context, you're part of a community, and then after that 4 years ends, like it's done, you know, like you're supposed to be making the rest of your life, and the rest of your life is supposed to look pretty much like what your life looked like before you went to college, you know?
I also feel like that makes you force yourself to have different identities to fit to like a socially context, which like for one, like your family, like we talked about, you have to kind of switch of how you go about things and how you talk or how you think, because you're with your family and they think differently than how you did during your 4 years in college, because your own values changed in college and how you think and how you act. So I feel like that makes it a lot harder for yourself when you feel like you have to fit certain contexts when it comes to your identity, and that's never healthy.
And yeah, for me, who was on his 5th and final year of college, I took a break between like transferring from a community college to Grand Valley, and so where like other people like I graduated in high school, or like some of my friends are already like on their next life stage and like getting into their careers, or maybe like internships, and kind of like settling in for their life job, I guess, or and I almost feel like it's like something you had to explain yourself, like why aren't you graduated yet, or like what are you going to be doing, or you know, it hasn't bothered me a ton, but also it feels like I do have to explain myself, like why I'm not on the next life stage yet. Based off of our 3 themes and what we collected from the interviewees and our own personal experiences, we have a few suggestions and options of what we believe you can do on campus and off campus to help alleviate stress, starting with
boundaries. So when we're talking about uniting all of these themes together into something that like an actual strategy that you could use to resolve the stress that, you know, they create, a huge way that you do that is by setting boundaries with people. And there's a lot of confusion about the way that this is done, and a lot of confusion about how to do this healthily and how to preserve your relationships through that. So I think that the most important part, starting with imposter syndrome, is knowing yourself and knowing what your values are. If you're acting within your values, then you know that you can never be upset about what you've done, because those are your values and that's what they are. And if your values change, that's also fine. That's like part of life. That's how you figure out how to set boundaries and stuff like that. That's how you resolve your own stress. So the idea of like setting boundaries is mostly dependent on knowing that your boundaries are primarily about you. So not calling somebody out, not making it about the person that you're setting the boundary with, because that's not the essence of the situation. That's not what we're talking about. Like you're just telling them what you need from them in order to keep the relationship afloat, you know? So I feel like that's more the central way to set boundaries, and I feel like that's like the most important thing when you're talking about like your expectations for others and your expectations for yourself. Your expectations for others aren't always going to be reasonable or fair, and you might not know that until they tell you. So like being able to hear that is also a huge part of setting boundaries. This connects also with life stages, because the way that you approach stress, and like the way that like your life feels impermanent, and like everything feels so ephemeral, and like everything's starting and ending so fast while you're in this transitional period. What your emotional health is centrally dependent on is that you can trust other people to listen to you when you need them to.
All right, and based off of what our interviewee said and the ways that they found were best to navigate their stress was in some shape or form finding a sense of community, whether it's through like a club or like a certain department. Like, for example, as the 2 interviews we mentioned earlier, they felt that they found a good sense of community and comfort in the LGBTQ department, where they were able to easily open up in any sort of way that they feel like they need to, or even if it's just there to hang out and feel comfortable with. And another option that we're given from the interviews is the counseling center, but more as like a start to something and not a final destination, because it's hard to rely on the counseling center when they're already dealing with so many other students, and maybe they can't help you in a sense where the severity of your issues or whatever it may be, that might not be a good final destination for you to navigate that sort of stress. But as anthropology students ourselves, we find the most use to navigate our stress within the anthropology department is a great example, because that is our form of sense of community, and since the department is so small, we all know each other pretty well, and we feel comfortable with our professors, and it's just a great way for us to open up and be comfortable with our professors, which helps us with our schoolwork, our work outside of school, and all of that sort of thing. So as we get more into these ways to navigate your stresses or resources, what ways do you guys feel like is the best to navigate?
Me, I noticed, like, just personally for me, what my biggest problem is like time management. So I would highly recommend having better time management. If you have poor time management, I procrastinate a lot, and I'm socially acceptable. Everyone knows that a lot of people procrastinate, but it does cause problems, of course, and cause more stress that I probably didn't need. Also, just working out, getting outside, even if it's something simple, like a walk or whatnot. Meditation is very helpful for a lot of people. Just that act of being outside, even if you aren't doing like a hard, rigorous activity. Taking time to do things you enjoy and not just like focusing on simply work and school is a great way to balance and alleviate your stress. As well as just like visiting like the rec center. I personally wouldn't recommend the rec center because I don't like large crowds or anything, but just having your own workout routine.
Yeah, so I would say personally for me, I do really enjoy the rec center, and I found this out a little bit too late in my college journey, but they do offer workout classes through the MindBody app. You download it, and it's $8 per month, and they have spin classes, they have boxing, they have yoga, they have whatever you could possibly want, and it's $8 a month. So for a college student, that's not too bad, and it's a good way to meet new people, form a sense of community, and then they also do a YouFit program that I found really helpful, and somebody sits down with you and talks about your goals and then builds you a personalized workout plan and teaches you how to do it, and then follows up with you on your progress. And I thought that was really cool. And they also offer personal training as well. So I do enjoy the rec center, but yes, it does get busy. I would say for me, kind of like you said earlier, meditation and just getting outside and soaking up the sun when you can, I think it's really helpful to me.
Yeah, just like finding moments of catharsis is like one of the most important parts. Just like knowing your limits and knowing what you're capable of, I feel like is like the central issue here. Just like a big part of knowing yourself is knowing your limits. Like your identity is largely correlated with those, and it's not a problem to have them. You're allowed to be restful. You're allowed to have moments where you can recharge, because that's what you need. And like you might not think that you need it, but you're gonna end up needing it at some point in your life. Like it's not gonna be perfect all the time. There's really no shame in having poor time management skills, but just acknowledging that you do and acknowledging why you do specifically. Like what about it is an issue for you? Like what about the task you're trying to complete is becoming an obstacle? Like that's the biggest part. Just like letting yourself say that, and letting yourself, you can talk about it out loud to other people if you want to. Like nobody would have an issue with that, and if they did, that's not your problem. You can just say why you're having an issue with time management, and if somebody's committed to misunderstanding your truth, then that's not anything to do with you. So finally, we would like to reiterate that like no matter where you are in your life, the one thing that you can always expect is that your stress is going to get worse. And when your stress is at the worst, that one thing that you can always expect is that it's going to get better. So I believe that Yeah, I believe that you can have stress and enjoy your life at the same time. It comes with the idea that like you're free in your mind. Maybe you don't have control over your circumstances, but you can be free in the way that you are, in the way that you choose to present yourself, in the way that you choose to feel about your problems. So, just like eating a pie, we hope you enjoyed having a slice of the stress pie at Grand Valley State.